Welcome back, everybody, to the Open Peace Podcast. My name is Abood Cohen, and my co-host Amir Sarder. Today, we're joined by Yoel Silver, right? And
Yep,
he's a
Leib
very good
Silver.
friend of mine. He told me about me and him talked a few conversations, really interesting ones about basically, as the title says, how to kickstart the peace process. This is one of the most challenging, I think, topics when we talk about this part of the world. And I think tonight is going to be an interesting one because Yoel and I really had some interesting talks. He comes from a Jewish background. I come from a Samaritan background, and we have also conversations with people who came from Muslim backgrounds, and we shared really interesting conversations that we're going to share with you tonight. Yoel, why don't you give everyone watching a small introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me on finally. I'm sorry it took a bit of time for it to happen, but
Sure.
the end, it finally happened. We knew it happened. And who knows, maybe we'll continue another time.
For sure.
So just to let everyone know, so my name's Yoel Silver. I come from, ironically enough, a place called Palestine, Connecticut.
Wow,
So
okay. I know that was, yeah.
I get to play the Palestinian card as well. Now, the irony of that, it's the name of the neighborhood in the town where I grew up. And the irony is everyone always thinks Palestine, what the heck, how did that happen? And the thing is, the name has been there for about 150, 200 years. It actually kind of moved around a little bit, which neighborhood's exactly not important, but the thing is that it actually came from the Jews that were there that were longing and desiring to go back to their homeland, which at the time was called Palestine. So the neighborhood would be called Little Palestine, and eventually the little got dropped, and it's just known as Palestine today. And if anyone doubts me, you can go look it up in Wikipedia or Google, and it actually will show up. So
See, because this is, and not to cut you off or anything, Yoel, but
yeah,
sometimes I had a few times where I had to kind of like choose a location to a friend so he could ship something to his city. I think it was Nablus. And when I searched Palestine, I get USA. I was like, what is going on? And
yeah,
so,
because you've got Palestine, Texas. You've got a couple in Indiana. There are a few other places. I looked them all up recently. I was talking to somebody about this, and all of them are from the 1800s. All of them predate even the British Mandate of Palestine. So you're talking very clearly the names came from the Jews because, for the most part, Islam didn't reach America until much more recently. I
right.
mean, Islam came over to America. Basically, it was from Henry Ford, if I remember right. He brought over a bunch of Muslims to work in the factories, and so that's how the area is by Dearborn. And there's another town that's actually majority Muslim. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. It blanks my name, but it's right near there, right outside of Detroit. And now it's much more spread out, but prior to that, it wasn't. And so any place that you see named Palestine basically was named for Jews in the States.
Wow.
Kind of an interesting start. So I grew up there, and we'll cut things a little bit shorter. So I did what's called Aliyah, moved to Israel, Palestine, the Holy Land, whatever you want to call this place, about just shy of 8 years ago. And at the time that I moved here, I was not involved in peace at all. It wasn't until after being here for a couple of years I realized the way that I was brought up and raised, a lot of it was connected. We were never taught to hate explicitly Muslims, but it's kind of like an implicit thing when you hear like after September 11th, was Islamic extremists and Palestinian terrorists all the time and things like that. And so it's like, even though you're taught to love everyone, you still have it like dripping into your system and like slowly. And so you don't realize that it's there because it's underneath the skin. So anyways, I lived in B'nai Brak at the time originally. And after sitting up there waiting for the buses in the morning, a lot of times I started realizing that, hey, here are these people that are coming in, they're building up our communities, building up a lot of the buildings and everything in our country, yet many people don't have enough respect for them. People spit in their direction, don't talk to them. And here I am, I can't even say good morning to many of them because not everyone speaks Hebrew. And so I took upon myself at that point to learn a little bit of Arabic to start slowly. At the beginning, just the good morning, sabah khair. how are you doing, Kif Khalak, things like that. But that was only a start. And so that combined with seeing this this documentary made by a leftist from Tel Aviv on the Israeli community of Tekoa in the Gush, where there's an interview with a lady by the name of Michal Fuman, who was actually stabbed while pregnant. And she tells her story about how all she could think about in the ambulance while she was going to the hospital was, how is this other guy doing? How is he handling things? Why did he get here? How did he get to this thing? And then talking about how in her house there's this interfaith prayer session where everyone came together to pay their respects to her. Her father-in-law obviously was very involved in this stuff, and it was kind of in his framework and following footsteps that one of the organizations I'm involved with, Shorshim, Roots, Shudur, depending upon which language we're referring to it in, was formed shortly after his passing by a couple of individuals located in that region, in Gush Etzion. So that's that. Around the same time, I actually, for many reasons, decided to leave Bnei Brak. I needed to get a little bit more back into nature, out and more breathing things. And so I ended up moving to a small community located right next to Karnei Shomron, about 10 minutes away from the city of Nablus, which
I
have no problem calling it Nablus.
I love your place. It's a very quiet,
Gorgeous.
kind of like village vibe.
Yeah.
Type place.
So, and I have no problem calling it Nablus because it came from the Roman renaming of it as Neapolis, the new city. So it's not even in the location of the original Shechem, which is in the area of Tel Balata, the Balativ.
Yeah, it's a little bit further, I think
south and east. And nowadays, Shechem, Nablus, whatever you want to call it, just this gigantic metropolis of a whole bunch of smaller communities that eventually became connected. So to refer to it as Nablus doesn't really bother me, whereas for many Israelis, it really bothers them. But so anyway, so I moved there and I started getting involved in Shorshim. At the same time, I got connected also with another group, the Interfaith Experience Association. And the two are very similar. Our clientele, our base is very much overlapping, but we offer a little bit of different styles and flares between the two. And one of the biggest differences is that at the end of the day, interfaith tries to stray away and keep away from any political discussion. So it's a little bit less of a tense environment in a sense. It's meant to be more about culture and whatnot. So, but part of how I got involved in some of these things, in my own personal view, and how we got to the idea of calling this one kickstarting peace processes. A lot of the problems that we have today, not all, I'm not going to say that all, but a lot of them come from the fact that we don't know one another. We have this language barrier issue, and we have all we hear on the televisions and on the internet and the radio and everything and on all social networks is fear, fear, fear. And so when people don't get to know the other side, there's fear. And so if you start by that, you start small and then you make more of effects and slowly it kind of snowballs. And it gets to the point, just like how a war can break out when the tension gets so great. So too, if the peace and if everything is so great, then eventually we can overcome. We'll go to the governments and the governments will have to say, all right, fine, we'll let you have your peace. Because at the end of the day, if the governments want to make a peace on paper, some sort of a legal agreement, that's pretty easy for them to do. They could find terms.
Yeah, you want the people to actually. Yeah, I always thought about that. I think people overlook that people actually need to. It's that simple. People actually need to love one another, and it doesn't matter if it's on paper or not. But the question is, if it is done on paper, will it make it easier? For the people.
I don't think so, because look, you've got two aspects there. You've got the paper aspect, the land, and the legal aspects that are involved with peace, and the fact that there needs to be something that's dealt with there. But you also have the on the ground, because even if you resolve all the peace issues, let's say you get to an agreement that all the land is taken care of, any lands that are in question, previous owners that can justify that their land was taken improperly are given payments and they're happy with these payments and they're not going to take money and then complain about it, like many have done in the past, where they kind of take the money quietly and then claim, "Oh, I never got paid. They stole my land." Blah blah blah. You need that, but you also need people one-on-one on the ground that they can interact, because and if you don't know your neighbor and you don't interact with them, it's not peace. That's just disconnect. You have no interaction whatsoever. So you really need both to do that. It's hard because you kind of need both to be working in parallel. But I personally think that the grassroots type operations from the bottom up, where you're meeting people and interacting, that one has much more the effect on the political one than making a political agreement would have on the ground piece.
And why do you believe that? If someone would have asked you, do you have like a personal experience? Because I also believe that, by the way. I do believe that meeting in person, talking in person, having experiences in person, having one another understand each other, and the different, understanding the differences in culture, traditions, I do believe 100% it will make people more peaceful with one another. But is that what the same reason? Maybe that's what I said.
Because I mean,
It's simple, I guess.
If people go out and they get to know one another, they can learn to appreciate and respect, even if they don't want to be friends. You don't have to love everybody. But at the same time, so actually I want to read something in a second, and I'll pull that up and read something I wrote the other day on a different topic, but very much applies here. But if you go in the direction of forcing people and say, okay, now we're at peace, how can you? It doesn't work. It doesn't stick. You can't just tell people, all right, now you're friends. I mean, it's like in school and the teacher says, all right, no, you guys are friends. But connected to that. So here's something I actually wrote. I want to read something I wrote to a friend on a different topic, and has been very relevant to many things. So I'll read it as I wrote it. One final thought. Something we can hopefully both agree upon is that in this true spirit or meaning of tolerance is an understanding that there will always be people in the world with whom you do not agree with or get along with. And no matter how much you try, some you will not be able to change. In some cases, you will not be able to avoid and will be required to deal with such people. True tolerance is recognizing this and dealing amicably and respectfully when engagement is necessary. But not only that, furthermore, tolerance is understanding and respecting their unalienable rights to hold these views and beliefs, however right or wrong they may be. That is true tolerance.
I like that a lot, Yoel. I like that a lot, and I want to touch on something that is mentioned in that statement, and also was talked about before. Is this word respect, kavod, or in Arabic, Abood is ihtiram, right?
Ihtiram.
Ihtiram. Yeah. Okay.
It's funny because I was just trying to think of what that word was. That I need to learn that word.
Yeah. So for me, that word is key to so much within solving this conflict. And I just want to try and play a little game of like of seeing the problem for how big it is, and how maybe discussing with you guys what can be done to solve it. So from an Israeli perspective, how do you expect to change the minds of Israelis that don't have respect for Palestinians and that still view them as the enemy? So, for example, they would say, how could I have respect for people that did suicide bombings? How can I have respect for people that send their children to fight us? How can I have respect for people that have committed murderous acts against innocent people? And then on a Palestinian side, on the staunch, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, these kind of people, how are you going to get them to respect when they say, look at the Zionists, they came in, they murdered us, they kill our children, they steal our land? How dare you want me to respect them? How do we deal with these two sides of the issue with regards to respect?
So you want me to answer, or you want to hear it? Does Abood want to say something on that first?
Whichever one of you guys.
I mean, if I had to say something, that's a really good question, Amir, because There's like a lot of people that have this, I don't know if you want to call it inherited hate,
Mm,
or
mm,
sometimes they don't even remember why they hate the other side in the first place. um, I think that does make having respect for the other side a little bit more challenging, but at the same time, um, maybe if they get face to face and just talk about it, and and just like be honest about it, maybe that's gonna make things even much easier than just text behind a screen or something like that.
mm, mm,
I don't know, like
Hmm.
encounters I see online, um, between Palestinians and Israelis are like sometimes you see them in a, I don't know, in a specific program that people bring Palestinians and Israelis, and suddenly you see either side accusing one another of like, but your people did this and your people did that, and I don't know if there's a pattern where after that, after they accused one another and they let that all out, you kind of start seeing some friendship going on. Maybe not all the time, but I've seen this personally with a workshop that I personally followed. So it's definitely something that it's like challenging. So, what do you think, Yoel?
So part of the issue, there's two things connected there, and in some ways they're not inseparable. It's one and the same, but at the same time, they're also in some ways independent. And that is bad education and also the narrative issue. Is we're coming at it with two different narratives.
mm,
Let's just look at it in terms of the Israeli, meaning Israeli Jewish, and the Palestinian, which is predominantly Muslim in this case, the whole narrative. There is the Christians that are wrapped up in there and get tossed in the side, and many times they're not really sure where to fall, especially if they're like Israeli Christians, because the ones who've been here, it's like they're here when it's called Palestine and everything. But that aside, so you kind of have this Israeli narrative and you have the Palestinian narrative. And the thing is, in order to move forward, we can't keep going with independent narratives. If we want peace, we need to figure out how we're going to do a narrative together. We need to
mm,
do a combined narrative.
mhm.
But part of the problem at the same time is the fact that both sides, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate from this from people, is that on both sides there's bad education,
Yeah.
both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. And it
When you
just
say
gets
bad, you mean like it's leading towards hate
the,
of one another, or
if not
un
outright hatred, more of an implicit hatred in some cases. It depends on. I feel like with the Palestinians, it's more of an outright hatred that they're taught to have, whereas with the Israelis, it's kind of like the hatred that I felt and saw myself after growing up in America, where it's, oh, everyone's equal, love everyone type deal. But it's kind of like dripped in there in such a way, and then combine that with the trauma of having all these wars, where many, if not most, of the Israeli public knows somebody personally who died in some sort of battle. So, I mean, thank God I don't personally know anyone. I can't think of anyone that I know or am connected with, and hope never to be in that situation. So I can't relate there, but it's the people have been traumatized. So trying to undo that trauma is a real challenge, and we can't expect it to happen overnight.
No, it will take a generation or two for that trauma to be dealt with. And like you said, Joel, I do believe a kind of joint narrative could really help in having a future that is based on trust and the two peoples living on the land peacefully. One of the things that I've thought about many a night is how to break the circle of violence, because for me this is one of the circles that keeps the conflict going, unfortunately, and it raises those old feelings that are there, that are left over by all the battle scars and all the
Yeah.
wars that have been fought. Do you think that before we have an agreement on paper, both peoples, both leaderships can do the utmost to reduce the level of violence and keep it to an absolute minimum? And will that be something that will kind of kickstart peace, if you like, between the people? Not so much an agreement, but people accepting each other and understanding each other's right to live freely on the land.
I think it would help because, look, there are people behind it who like seeing the situation as it is, because let's be frank, for both the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority, the status quo is actually the best that you could possibly get. Because for the Palestinian Authority, it allows them to maintain their position of getting lots of money flowing in from governments around the world, being able to kind of ignore their people, and having the rest of the world be blind to it, willingly blind to it. It's not nobody. When push comes to shove, nobody's going to deny that the Palestinian Authority is neglectful of its people. It's a reality that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas are funneling money towards other things when they get it. But they're getting lots of money from government projects all around the world. They use some of the money to do some of those projects, and then some of the money gets pocketed. And like, you hear stories about, like, with one of the prime examples of how the abuse goes on is with electricity, where the Palestinian Authority, except for in Gaza, doesn't produce any of its own electricity. So all its electricity is bought from the Israeli government. But they're not paying the Israeli government the full amount that they're supposed to be paying. The Israeli citizens are paying money towards that indirectly. You have other countries that are also giving money towards it. And at the same time, the Palestinians are paying for their electricity. So where is the money that's
are the Palestinians in Gaza paying for their electricity or not?
I don't know how it works in Gaza, but I'm saying at least in the West Bank, I know that the Palestinians, they pay for their electricity. And at the same time, they're also getting, their government is not paying back the Israeli government for the proper amount of electricity.
So I think,
the money doesn't add up.
Palestinians, I know that, like, in the West Bank, they do pay electricity.
Yeah.
But you're talking specifically about probably some regions, like some refugee camps, Balata,
No, I'm not saying that they don't pay. I'm saying they do pay. And I'm saying that the Palestinian Authority is collecting money for it, but not paying back to the Israeli government that's supplying the electricity.
My bad, I got you.
So someone's taken a cut along the way, basically. Someone's taken a cut.
Similarly, on the Israeli side, they like the situation because as soon as you have peace, then you have to deal with a situation where either you're going to have to move, if you go with the classical two-state solution, you either have to pull out your citizens that are there or kind of abandon them and leave them to be under a Palestinian rule, which may or may not be good. Or you have the other extreme of the one-state solution, which I think there are plenty of other ideas if we break our mindsets and our schemas, where the Israelis don't particularly want that because it's like, oh my gosh, now we're going to have all these Arabs that we're going to have to join in, and how do we give them citizenship and they maintain our Jewish identity? And it's like, there's a lot of things, because it gets into this very deep fundamental discussion also is it even Jewish to have a democratic government or not? Or are those at odds? And so when you start trying to balance all these things, it becomes crazy. And so for those in power, it's like, okay, we've got war going, and everyone knows that war it really keeps economies moving. So for those who have the power, it's kind of ideal because it kind of flares up and then calms down, flares up, calms down, and it never gets so out of control, and everyone kind of stays somewhat in check.
I see your point, Yoel. I see your point, and unfortunately, I agree on a lot of what was said. The status quo does keep the players in play at the moment hands strong, right? Hamas can be seen as strong in Gaza by fighting the good fight. They sent a rocket over to Ashkelon just a couple of nights beforehand, and look, we are the resistance, while not actually doing anything for the Gazan people. And the PA in the West Bank, like you said, a lot of its funding comes from Europe, America, and other places all over the globe. And they don't want to lose out on that cash by having the problem solved, if you like, and then having to look at all these other countries and crises that are going on in the world that maybe really do need having a look at, like the war in Ethiopia that no one seems to be talking about, Yemen, Libya, what's going on now with Russia and Ukraine. So I definitely see the problem there. My kind of thought on it is that the people must push for it, because we're the ones that are living here and that are fed up. So I really do think it's on Israeli citizens and on Palestinian citizens, whether they live in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, or in Gaza, to put pressure for a peaceful outcome, so that we don't see the revolving circle of violence. Because it does flare up every now and again. We never know when it's going to flare up. And unfortunately, what you said is very true, Yoel. Everybody knows someone who's either been involved in, or has a cousin who was involved in an attack or in a war, or something that has happened to them. And with the population increasing here rapidly, by 2050, it's going to be one of the most populated Western countries. These attacks and these things, unless we have a real peace, they're just going to increase and increase and spiral, unfortunately. So I think it really is up to the citizens to try and push as much as they can. People like yourself, Yoel, who are living on the land, who are part of this land. And Abood, I'm sure you know where you're from. In terms of tourism, in terms of economy, like, peace can only bring good things for Nablus and for Al Gerizim and for
You're
the whole
completely right,
region.
Amir. I think it's when we talk about meeting in person, some people, like, they come to the mountain here and they see Israelis and Palestinians in the same place, buying in the same store and watching the same event. Like when you see the Passover ceremony and you come here. See, when we talk about like political leaders, if they wanna have like this agreement of peace, I hope they have a plan for something like that. Because what do they expect? If our governments are okay, we're gonna be okay. Because in the end, I don't know if it's the opposite of who's gonna come first, but I guess we got to start somewhere, and that somewhere kind of looks like what Yoel talked about at the beginning of the episode of people meeting. I think this is like really the best place to begin with, and it's really like hands-on experience of how you can sit with the person you thought might have been your enemy, and turned out to be otherwise. I don't want to make it sound poetic or anything, but it's the truth is the truth, I guess. And if we do want any kind of like ending of any violence, it better start with, understanding one another and knowing even where the violence comes from. Because you see, some people, they might get the hatred from a specific, trauma that happened with them, and they don't even know that. They might, like you said, they might have a cousin or a relative or something like that. But then they realize that, the other side also might have had something like that. And they might have empathy, and they might, they might not blame one another for something like that.
And part of the thing with that is it's one thing if we are able to change ourselves and think about it, but it's more important that we also focus on the next generation, which is why, as you guys both know, when I go to many events that are involving with both sides and reaching out, it's important for me to bring my kids when I'm able to, because start them young to see it and understand. I mean, God willing, they'll all be able to speak Arabic by the time they're older, and that'll allow for easier bridge building, because part of the issue is we don't really have a common language. Many of the Palestinians don't speak Hebrew. And many of the Israelis don't speak Arabic. And so it's like when you get together in a room, it's even if you have English, a lot of times there's always a handful of people who can't understand. And so there's always, you need to use some sort of translation and moderation.
I mean, look at us Samaritans. We speak pretty good Arabic and Hebrew, and we're getting pretty, we're getting along pretty well. And we know. And I think that, that's definitely a good reason why. To be able to communicate. You see, one of the things that we were facing as a challenge with opening the Open Peace podcast, we thought about it like, man, we need some episodes in Arabic and in Hebrew if we're really serious about like
Yeah.
having peace in this region, because we're getting nowhere close to like even, what are you gonna do? Bring the English speaking people and leave out, But still, I think this is a super important
Maybe
step.
maybe we should do the three of us a similar discussion in a couple months in Hebrew.
يلا
That's what
بسمخة.
I'm saying. Yeah, and you see, that's one thing.
That's the beauty of the three of us, is we can both do English and Hebrew.
I'm down. But like you said, education is definitely super, super key to any of this Kickstart starting. Because I learned in Palestinian schools from first grade to third grade, and then moved back to the mountain and the school in our neighborhood. Then went back to Nablus at about seventh grade. Continued until I graduated from university, and I've seen what has been taught there. I'm not saying that they're teaching hate or anything like that. It's definitely peaceful, but there are some things that, whether they're true or not, they kind of like plant some seed of, like, for example, hatred. I don't know. Some people might like it when I say that. Like, that's how I felt, whether they're true or not. And the question comes of, okay, so you have said this fact, people should know about, like, for example, whether each side committed any crimes or anything like that. But there are some things that are actually like that make a person really like basically not understand why they're feeling this way towards the other person. So,
well, part of it's the way that we relate to a situation. I mean, the way that a story is portrayed in the Israeli media is going to be different than it's portrayed in the Palestinian media, and that's different than it's portrayed in some of the world stage medias in other countries. And so you could have the same story, and the way that they react to it and the details that are shared, sometimes you have complete lies in some of the stories.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it's necessarily on one side always. It varies. Sometimes it's on all sides. You have a story that has a shred of truth in each of them, and they use it to manipulate. But in a kind of similar vein in things, I mean, let's leave out religious and prophetic views of things, and which kind of establishes certain rights and wrongs and absolutes on it. Leave that aside for a second, and beliefs. You're not going to know what the right outcome is necessarily until it's in the past, until the history. Only time will tell. I mean, one of the ways that you can compare and examples and things is you can kind of compare the Palestinians as being, like, in a way similar to the American people pre-Revolutionary War. And I think to some degree they see themselves that way. And so assuming that they are victorious in the end, then all of a sudden the world will be on their side and things will look as, we were right. But if they lose, this whole idea that the textbooks, the history books are written by victors. It's not by the losers. The losers try and hide what happened during those years and then move on from it.
You're right. It's a good point. Actually, I've overlooked this point. I don't know. Like, how can we? I don't know who controls education anyway, to be able, like, the government, right? And like, it's gonna be a question of if they're gonna have their agenda fulfilled, and I don't think peace is necessarily, on one of them. Because we opened this podcast, when we opened this organization, if you remember, Amir, we started literally like just making meetings, and then we started like thinking about it. Okay, so what could be as close as possible like with those few tools that we have. And then we realized, these conversations that we're having, these are pretty valuable. We're understanding, we can bring guests, and eventually we started to realize that just people, when they just get the knowledge from a trusted source and see that, are they getting their information not only in a correct way from a trusted source, but is it the information that they want to hear, and is it, all these things. I think this is what we want from the podcast. The question is if it's if we're really if we're really gonna have this impact, and it's not easy. It's literally the most complex region in the world. Like when
Yeah,
it comes
yeah,
to like complex.
yeah. You're right, Abood. You're right. It is very complex, but I think the impact we're having. I like to think of it like this: like my mom, who's a teacher, who was a teacher, she's now in her pension age. But when she was teaching, she always said to me, Amir, if I can just influence one person out of all the people I've taught, the thousands and thousands of people she taught in her whole life, if she even managed to get through to one person, then that's already a victory for her. And I kind of think of the same thing with regards to the podcast and having an influence. And I can tell you,
Yeah,
Abood, we're already doing it because I don't know if I told you this story, Abood, but I was playing football in Jaffa, in Yafo, and one of the people that I was playing with was a young guy in his early 20s, and he straight away recognized my voice from the podcast. And he was like, "Oh, hey Amir, like oh, it's you
he
from the podcast."
recognized your voice from the
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
yeah. Seriously, I must have shouted, like pass the ball or something. I don't know what. And he recognized my voice, and we had a talk after the match about it. So
What are the odds, man? Nice.
it's crazy, and that's the thing. We live in such a small place that I can guarantee you we've already had an influence, and hopefully we can push that on further. And Yoel, it will be great if you were a part of that as well in the future, and
Yeah.
coming back on and having these discussions, because I do think that laying down the foundation, like what we were talking about earlier, the peace between peoples will come before the political agreement, and will almost push for the political agreement, if you see what I mean.
Right.
We will be enforced upon these leaders
Yeah,
to
I mean, look at
Okay.
make a step.
history. Did how like for example, we have some examples of two nations fighting for hundreds of years, right? And
Mhm.
in the end, it was the people first, right? I mean, it's not
Yeah,
like they're doing an uprising necessarily against the government, but it was definitely the people who united.
Correct. Because when you have the governments do it, they put it on the people, and it's like the people, they have a certain pride in their government and in their identity and their nationality. So it's like, how dare these people come at us? And it's like
True.
the people on the other side don't really have a problem with the people. It's this narrative and idea that's being spewed from above, and so it causes these issues.
100%.
Mm.
See, when it comes to Palestinians and Israelis, though, see, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of stories of people having conflicts. But, for example, what was it, Amir, that you gave once as an example of like 400 years of conflict? Was it the English and
Oh, the Irish,
the
yeah, the
Irish?
English and Irish, and that was solved like literally only 30 odd years ago. So it's a great example to
And
talk
how
about.
it was it solved? It's just people deciding it's like just we don't want.
So it came to a political agreement during the Good Friday agreements when both parties sat down. But it was the people that almost were like, the younger generation was just fed up of fighting and had enough of seeing the violence and the endless circle of violence again. And then the Good Friday agreements came about, and that's how they kind of got rid of the IRA, which was like, in the Irish terms, was the Irish Republican Army. On the British side, they were seen as terrorists, because they would do bombings in the UK and stuff like that. And in the end, like, part of the thing that helped solve it is that the IRA was disbanded, and they gave amnesty to certain people that were in the IRA. So it meant that they couldn't be prosecuted for anything that happened during the time of war, which is known as, or the Troubles. It's known as the Troubles. So basically, they made the ground almost fruitful for peace, the younger generations, and pushed it on the leaders to create this peace. And since then, it's worked. They also did a weapons callback, so they gave amnesty for people in the IRA. So this could actually work here for terrorist groups as well. They said, look, come and give back your weapons, your bombs, your arms, anything that you have, and you have like a week to do it or 10 days to do it, and you won't be prosecuted for anything. So it made people that had weapons and had, plenty of stuff stashed to just say, okay, the troubles are over. I'm going to give this stuff back, and that will be that. Now, obviously, it didn't make everybody happy. In the long run, some people in Ireland, they still want the North to be part of the Republic and for Ireland to be one again. But at the moment, for the last 30 years, the deal has worked and things have been functioning okay up there. And the radicals are a very, very minute percentage of the people over there currently. So it's been a success so far. It's been a success so far. And I always say to my Irish friends that if we as Israelis and Palestinians could be at the point at which the Irish and English are now, that would be incredible. I mean, so you'd have full trade, economic, cultural exchange, everything you can imagine, sports. But it's going to take a while here. It definitely will take a while.
Yeah, I mean, at least we need to like set the seeds, like they say.
Yeah.
Part of what makes our situation so different though than theirs is, in our case, here you have, and I'm going out on a limb putting it like this, and people are going to get annoyed at me for this, I'm sure, but you have the Israeli side where for the entirety of its existence as a state, as a governmental organization, a large chunk, if not the majority of its economy is driven by the defense industries. So to convince them to say, okay, we're ready to be now at peace, where a large part of it is towards weaponry and arming people and citizens, both domestically and abroad, it goes against the financial interests. On the flip side, you have I don't want to call it a country because it's not a country, a member state, an organization, whatever you want to call it, a political entity, whose entire national identity is focused on being a victimized, oppressed people. So you've got to, in order to bring about peace, you have to uproot like kind of the main aspect, a major aspect of both sides in order to do so. And that's part of what drives it so hard.
It's a good point. It's a very good point, Yoel. But this will be something that, will have to be thought about extensively when the leaders get to a point at which, okay, we're signing something.
Yes.
I think what Abood was saying before, like laying the seed, sowing the seed, and laying the groundwork is what needs to be done now. And those kind of things, they'll be settled at the end of the day in a big agreement. So like, for a few weapons manufacturers to lose out on a bit of cash for peace, like let bygones be bygones. It's no skin off my back. I would rather consumer prices go down here and food and electricity and bills will be cheaper for people than pumping tax money into defense.
Well, I know groceries and I don't know. I think Israel is like the third most expensive or fourth most expensive.
It's crazy, Abood. It's crazy, Abood. It's actually it's insane how the prices here work. And unfortunately,
not to mention real estate. That's even crazy.
As well.
Don't even get started on that.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's because of greedy people. It's monopolies that run the supermarkets. There's not enough competition from abroad. The reason why in Europe and in the UK you get cheap prices for your foods is because there's so much competition. You have Tesco, Lidl, Aldi, Sainsbury's, so many big chains that are competing for your pound and your penny. Over here, it's very limited. And then they price fix things, so they say this can't drop below this kind of price. And then everyone, whether you're paying $5.50 or $5.80 or $5.40, it's all going to work out the same at your bill at the end. So yeah, for me, the defense money is something that will be looked at and will be solved in the future. With regards to the victimization of Palestinians, I don't think I can really comment because I'm not Palestinian, so I wouldn't really know, how much that is a big part of the identity. Maybe Abood, you can touch on it a little bit. I'm just not too sure on that one.
Can you repeat the question? I didn't catch up when you said
Yoel,
about touching about the Palestinian.
yeah, like the victimization. Yoel said that being a victimized group plays a big part of their identity, and that's kind of a big obstacle to peace. How would you see that, or is that something that you see?
You mean as a Samaritan, maybe, or something like that?
Yeah, yeah,
Or being like, for example, because you're born as, let's say, a Palestinian, and because your community thinks collectively, you mean, then you're forced to think in a specific way and act in a
yes, yeah, yeah.
that
Seem to
is
seem to
definitely,
think that you're a victim. Yeah,
yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges. Remember one of our Palestinian friends that came to our gatherings,
of course.
I think almost a year ago.
Yeah,
um we had to blur his face, and that tells you a lot about, even like when they want to talk about peace,
yeah.
they feel like they're betraying their nation, and that's something crazy, because
Mm.
that's a huge obstacle for peace, obviously. And
Well, it's not just
and
that they
I
feel like they're
think that,
betraying their nation, but there's a real fear because in some cases it becomes
true,
seen as normalization, and normalization is against the law under the Palestinian laws.
you're right.
So
Yeah,
they
you're
can be
right. I
jailed.
didn't
And
mean to see
I've met
feel. I
people.
didn't mean to say feel. Um, but perhaps like that, people make them feel like it.
I mean that
Uh,
there was this whole thing a couple years back now. Svi Kelly, an
Mm.
Israeli journalist, did this whole thing where he went around to the Palestinians in the Gush, and he interviewed them, asking them if they had the opportunity to have the Israeli ID, would they want it? Would they actually take it? All things aside, no
interesting.
showing faces, blurred faces, etc. And basically, by and large, everyone said that they wanted it, and most people want their faces blurred. The last group actually, they actually had no problem showing their faces out there. They were not afraid. And the one thing that most people didn't realize when it came out, including him, is shortly after he left the village doing that interview, the Palestinian Authority police actually came and arrested those individuals, a number of the ones who gave that
Whoa.
interview.
Oh God.
And yeah, true story. And many of them are connected actually with Shorashim. So I found out about like a day or two later, like after the interview came out, that they had been arrested and things. And then a few weeks
That's
later,
insane.
Tzvi Hezkelly actually did a follow up talking about the fact that they were arrested afterwards. Once he learned that they were arrested after he and his camera crew left the town and everything. And it's, I
That's
mean, when you
insane.
think about it, and this kind of just shows you how much it's from the education and the influences of the governments is why is it so a Palestinian is not allowed to cross into quote unquote Israel proper without a permission.
Mhm.
Okay, fine. And then they place it on the flip side. There's these big red signs at the entrances to the Palestinian areas saying that Israelis are not allowed to enter. But that's a bit misleading because Israeli Arabs can go in no problem. It's only Israeli Jews that it's a problem for. And it's against the Oslo agreements to say this, A. B, it's the Israeli government that puts down this requirement. It's not the Palestinians that say, oh, you're not welcome. It's the Israeli that says, no, this set of our citizens, this one specific sect, it's against the law for you to go into those regions.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The status quo currently in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, whatever you want to call that piece of land, is ridiculous, and it's untenable. It can't last. It's something that needs to be looked at.
Correct.
And unfortunately, the way things are at the moment, the status quo just isn't working for anybody. So these kind of agreements that were done in Oslo such a long time ago, I think just need to be re-looked at. And a lot of people don't realize this. Those agreements were only supposed to last 5 years, and then they were supposed to be talked about again, and things were supposed to be hashed out, but that never happened, of course, with all the bloodshed that occurred after in those years. They were some very, very violent years after Oslo.
A little less than a year ago, I had the pleasure of hearing one of the main architects of it. I forget the guy's name at the moment. I got to hear him speak at
Architects of the Oslo?
Yeah, at one of the Shorshim events. He came and he was a guest speaker at Shorshim, what they call a Café Judur, which starts out basically as kind of like an open house. You come there, and it works really well there because they have a plot of land in the Gush, right near Tzomet the Gush, that is on the private property of the Abood family. And so everyone can get there with their cars. It's a nice neutral zone. Everyone feels comfortable. And they have these events where people come in, you drink some coffee, you have some light refreshments, and then maybe you'll have a speaker. And so that night we had one of the architects of the Oslo Accords. I wish I could remember his name right now. And he talked about how it was never meant to be a permanent thing.
By the way, do you want to mention to Amir? Amir might like this story.
Which one?
The one where your accident.
Yeah,
Amir.
Yeah, I guess I can mention it. It's not a story that I go around telling everyone about.
Some of it. I mean,
but cutting some of the details out and things. So I had an accident. Yeah, no, I was coming back from an event one time, and I was passing through, and it's an area that's kind of behind Nablus, in an area where it's Area C, so anyone can be there, but it's like this awkward little area where very few people go unless you have a reason to go there, and it's kind of discouraged to go. And by a number of weird conditions, I ended up having an accident. Thank God nobody was injured more than the car. But where it was, because it's a main road between Nablus and one of the surrounding villages, many people came, many responded. There was somewhere between like 80 and 100 people on the street, because you had all the Israelis that were at the event that were kind of heading back home. You had the Israeli military that showed up, obviously, because of the location. You had the Palestinians, the local ones who were there. You had the Palestinian police department that showed up, or fire department that showed up. And you had lots of people that were traveling on the road and stopped. And it was just, and I think the part that he really wants me to mention is how there was this kind of like this division between the people, where you had the Palestinians on one side, the Israelis on the other. And then you had me, who was like walking back and forth between everyone, trying to deal with things, look at my car, what's going on, figure out things. And I'm interacting with the Palestinians as best as I can in my broken Arabic, and along with Hebrew and English depending upon who could speak what. And we may do through different ways and things and translations. Meanwhile, you've got all the Israelis telling me, don't interact with them, and like trying to pull me away. It's like, what's the big deal? They're trying to help here. And
they're trying to be good Samaritans.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it seems like just the situation that you would get yourself into, Yoel. From the time that I've known you, it's crazy to think about, But I'm just glad that just shows you what good both peoples are at the end of the day, right? They're both there to help, and they didn't know whether you were Jewish, whether you were Muslim, Christian. Both groups of people came to help somebody that was in a tough situation. Obviously, a car accident is not a pleasant thing to be involved in. And I'm just glad that they were there to help you out at the end of the day.
It's quite amazing. There's a lot of little stories like that I've seen in instances. And the problem is, it's like my friend. I have a friend, Ahmed, who always mentions how when people come into his shop that he has, he's always like, all right, what's the difference between a Jew and a Muslim? None. There's no difference. At the end of the day, we're all people. All right, we have different things, but at the end of the day, you have good people and you have bad people. And it can come on both sides of the fence.
Yeah. That's key. That's key to understanding things.
Amen to that.
Yeah. That is honestly, and I'd love to meet Ahmed and just tell him that he's completely right about that. And I wish people would treat each other that way, the same way they treat anyone try and be as good as you can. That's going to be very, very helpful in laying a foundation for peace on the Holy Land. And I did also want to talk to you a little bit, Yoel, about something you mentioned earlier, which was the education.
Yeah.
And for me, if we want to solve this, people like yourself who, you don't just live peace activism, online or behind a keyboard. You are on the land taking your children, your most beloved, to events with Israelis, with Palestinians, and showing them what real activism is about.
Right.
And I take my hat off to you, sir, because I really, I feel that that's an amazing thing to do. And I think that, people can learn a hell of a lot from that experience. And
Actually, it's quite the contrary with me. I'm not really on social media and things. Once in a blue moon, at most, I'll write a article or something and then have someone who is on there publish it, usually anonymously, actually, because for whatever reason, when people see my name, when they do know me, it's like it shuts people off to things. But it's like as soon as I remove my name and remove the identity from it, then they're more willing to hear what I have to say. Whereas once you throw my name, it's like, oh, he's that kook.
So one thing I did want to ask you is, you're seeing this kind of activism having an impact on your kids. Do you see other people from communities around you that also are outreaching and trying to do as many projects with the neighbors, or is it a very individualistic thing for you?
It's starting to catch on a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do with the action with the groups that I'm involved with here in the different frameworks and whatnot is trying to do more events that are either family friendly or not just your standard, oh, let's sit down and have a conversation model of peace activism, which is kind of the general, like, oh, kumbaya, let's choose a topic, let's sit around and discuss, but rather let's go out and do a barbecue. Or one that we're trying to shoot for in the very near future is do a jam session, which is an idea that's been brought about where people just bring some musical instruments, do a little bit of a round of introductions, allow for some time to chat, and then just chill out, have a good time, interact beyond just.
You had, I think, you should definitely come to Mount Gerizim, do these tours and events, if you know what I mean.
Definitely.
Palestinians, Israelis. I wish we had more time to speak with you, Yoel. Really, it's been definitely a pleasure. You're one of the the guests that really talk the talk and walk the walk, you know what I mean. Like
definitely,
you really have hands-on experience on really what it's like to have a person in front of you, and basically many people do not do that these days. Talking about Palestinians Israelis meeting in person, and I wish we had more of that.
Well, one of the biggest challenges, just quickly, one of the biggest challenges to the whole thing, and this is something that we face all the time in our groups, is finding a solid place to meet that's comfortable for everyone. And that's a real challenge because with the settlements, all right, people say, oh, settlements are one of these roadblocks to peace, but without them, you can't even begin to entertain the ideas and look at it, where you need them there to entertain that. But the problem is, to do something inside the settlements, many of the Palestinians, it's challenging for them. They have hard feelings and this and that. But for Israelis to go into a Palestinian village, you also have that challenge and the logistics. And so we usually actually, in this region, and we're covering a large span from as far north as up in the Triangle region, and we have people coming from that area and as far away as Ramallah, and then even some from like the Gush and Yerushalayim, even though they're things close to them, some of them actually choose to come to our area. We're meeting up on Hagarizim because it's the most neutral place
one of
we
the
can
few
get
places
to. But even then, there's still certain logistics. It's for the people from Ramallah, it's pretty far. It's also, they're forced to drive through the city through long, windy roads. whereas
All
the
right.
Israelis have a little bit of an easier ascent to get up there. It's more direct.
Mm, mm. Well, I really hope that you manage to find the right locations for it, because it's needed. It's needed, and
Yeah.
it's great work, Yoel. And honestly, I think, you know, if every Israeli and every Palestinian took a leaf out of your book, I think we'd be writing a new book with a completely different title over here, and it wouldn't be the Israeli Arab conflict. It would be, something along the lines of a peaceful holy land for all, or something like that.
God willing.
Yeah, God willing, inshallah, and alevai. Hopefully,
And
we'll
Hashem.
see those days. We'll see those days. Hopefully, we will
I
indeed.
think Palestinians Israelis would make really good dishes, especially
Ooh.
like with tahini dishes.
Oh
Yoel is a
man.
big fan of our
All right,
tahini. By the way.
I'm gonna do the shameless Samaritan plug tonight, but not on the tahini. Rather, my choice of drink tonight has been the Samaritan arak. I've been drinking it tonight.
Well, I made
Ooh.
the logo, by the way.
Abood, I haven't tried any of that stuff yet, man. I haven't tried any
Yeah,
of
I
it.
actually made the logo for them. They
Oh,
saw
did
the
you
logo
really?
and yeah, yeah,
Seriously.
yeah. The
Nice.
guy lives next to me in the supermarket, and he was like, "Yo, can you make me a logo at like mountain? Because it's Mount Gerizim." And I was like, "Oh, let's
Okay,
see."
I'll put it
So
back up again.
this, with some like four letters of Luza in ancient Hebrew on them. Not the design, though. I didn't make the design, but pretty cool.
What does that name
Um,
mean, by the way? What does Luza mean exactly? Where'd that come
Luza.
from?
Well, it appears in Genesis when Jacob came to Mount Gerizim in Samaritanism. In Judaism, it's Jerusalem. He says, the Torah says, "Ve'ulam Luza Sham Ha'ir Larishona," which means that
So that's
the name of the city was
the
Luza.
the origin. Wow.
That's the origin. Yeah.
Yeah, no, because for us, it's in the Jewish tradition, it's Bethel is
Yeah.
Luza. Luz, it's not referred to as Luza. Luza is actually in Hebrew, the Hay is saying that he came to there.
That's
So
awesome.
it's
Well, there you
Luz.
go, ladies and gentlemen. This episode was not only sponsored by the Samaritan Tahini Har Bracha, but also Samaritan Arak. Please drink safely. And all right, I think this is where we run out of time. Thank you so much again, Yoel. It
My
was an
pleasure.
absolute pleasure. We
Real
would
Hopefully,
definitely like to
everyone.
have you.
Hopefully, people enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We'll hope. We're hoping to have you in the future again. And for those who
Inshallah.
are watching, do not forget to leave a like if you like the episode. Share it definitely. It helps us a lot. We're just getting started, Amir. I'm sure you know what I mean.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh yeah.
for sure, subscribe if you haven't already, and hope to see you in future episodes. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye for now, guys.